Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Be sure to check out Dragon Shield for all of the best accessories to protect your decks. TCG Player for cards at great prices while supporting local game stores. And Patreon, where you get awesome benefits for your direct support. Our Patreon Discord CEDH Webcam League is in full swing this month. We are giving away $1,000 in cash prizes. All you have to do is sign up to Patreon at any tier to gain access. Check us out on Twitch every Wednesday evening for great games of CEDH with special guests every week. If you sub to Twitch, you'll get additional perks such as access to our Discord. On February 26th, we are hosting a CEDH tournament on our Discord. It will be 100% proxy friendly and there is over $1,200 in cash prizes. All you have to do to participate in the tournament is sign up to our Patreon. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Ryan piloting Imperial Painter. Also known as Strawberry Shortcake, this deck aims to execute a Painter's Servant Grindstone combo on its opponents while using Imperial Recruiter as a toolbox for answers. Ryan's opening hand contains a Smuggler's Copter, Karn the Great Creator, Goblin Engineer, Mountain, Imperial Recruiter, and 2 Scalding Tarns. Next we have Zach piloting Lands. This deck uses multiple land synergies and executes a Dark Depths combo to win. Zach's opening hand contains a Grove of the Burn Willows, Wasteland, Elvish Reclaimer, Crop Rotation, Mox Diamond, and 2 Dark Depths. Without further ado, let's kick off this fast fanatical frenzy of fun. Ryan wins the Saturday morning cartoon trivia game and gets to start us off. Ryan plays a Scalding Tarn for turn. He passes. Zach draws and casts a Mox Diamond, discarding Dark Depths. He plays a Grove of the Burn Willows. He casts Elvish Reclaimer. Zach passes. At the end of Zach's turn, Ryan cracks a Scalding Tarn, pays a life, and fetches up a Plateau onto the battlefield. Ryan draws and plays a Mountain. He casts a Lotus Petal. He cracks his petal to cast Imperial Recruiter. It enters, and Ryan fetches up a Magus of the Moon into his hand. Ryan ends his turn. Zach draws and plays a Wasteland. He cracks it, destroying Ryan's Plateau. Zach gives the turn to Ryan. Ryan draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Mountain onto the battlefield. He casts Smuggler's Copter. Ryan ships the turn to Zach. At the end of Ryan's turn, Zach taps Grove of the Burn Willows, gaining Ryan a life to activate Elvish Reclaimer. He sacrifices Grove and fetches up a forest onto the battlefield. The turn moves to Zach. Zach draws and moves to combat. He attacks Ryan with Elvish Reclaimer. Ryan takes 3 since Zach has 3 lands in his graveyard. In his second main phase, Zach casts Life from the Loam, returning Dark Depths, Grove of the Burn Willows, and Wasteland to his hand. He plays a Field of the Dead into play tapped and passes the turn. Ryan draws and plays a Scalding Tarn for turn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Mountain onto the battlefield. He casts Magus of the Moon. Zach sighs a bit, and Ryan moves to combat. He crews Smuggler's Copter and attacks. Copter triggers, and Ryan draws and discards Grindstone. Zach takes it, and Ryan passes. Zach draws and plays a Dark Depths. He passes. Ryan draws and plays a Mountain. He casts Karn, the Great Creator. In response, Zach floats a green from Mox Diamond. Karn resolves, and Ryan moves phases to fizzle Zach's mana. In his second main phase, Ryan activates Karn's first ability, turning Zach's Mox Diamond into a creature, killing it. Ryan passes. At the end of Ryan's turn, Zach casts Punishing Fire, killing Magus of the Moon. Since Moon is no longer on the battlefield, Dark Depths triggers. Zach sacrifices it and creates a 2020 Merit Lodge token. The turn moves to Zach. Zach draws and moves to combat. He attacks Ryan with Merit Lodge. Ryan crews his Smuggler's Copter and blocks. Copter triggers, and Ryan draws and discards. Copter dies, and in Zach's second main phase, he plays a Grove of the Burn Willows. Zach passes. Ryan draws and casts a Lotus Petal. He activates Karn's second ability, putting Ensnaring Bridge from his sideboard into his hand. He cracks his petal and casts Ensnaring Bridge. He casts Goblin Engineer. It enters, and Ryan fetches up a Painter's Servant into his graveyard. Ryan ends his turn. At the end of Ryan's turn, Zach taps his Grove of the Burn Willows, gaining Ryan a life. Punishing Fire triggers, and Zach pays to return it to his hand. He then floats mana and casts Crop Rotation, sacrificing Field of the Dead and fetching up a Taiga onto the battlefield. He casts Punishing Fire, killing Ryan's Goblin Engineer. The turn moves to Zach. Zach draws and plays a Ghost Quarter. He taps Grove, gaining Ryan a life, and returns Punishing Fire to his hand. He moves to combat and attacks Karn with Elvish Reclaimer. In combat, Zach casts Punishing Fire, killing Ryan's Imperial Recruiter. Ryan then declares no blocks, and in response, Zach sacks his Ghost Quarter, destroying Ryan's Mountain. Ryan searches, and in an unfortunate turn of events, Ryan fails to find. Now Elvish Reclaimer is a 3/4 and Karn takes it, going to 1 loyalty. Zach passes the turn. Ryan draws and plays a City of Traders. He activates Karn's first ability. Ryan ends his turn. During his draw step, Zach dredges Life from the Loam back to his hand. In his main phase, he casts Life from the Loam, returning Ghost Quarter, Field of the Dead, and Bojuka Bog to his hand. He plays a Ghost Quarter. Zach moves to combat. In response, Ryan casts Pyroblast, targeting Elvish Reclaimer. Zach scratches his head a bit, but then realizes what Ryan did. Elvish Reclaimer is a valid target for Pyroblast. It only destroys the permanent on resolution. What Ryan did do though was take the last card out of his hand and prevented Zach from attacking with Elvish Reclaimer now. Zach moves to a second main phase and sacrifices Ghost Quarter, destroying Ryan's mountain. Ryan fails to find, shuffles, and Zach passes the turn. Ryan draws and activates Karn's second ability, killing it and putting Tormod's Crypt from his sideboard into his hand. He casts Tormod's Crypt. He sacrifices it, targeting Zach. In response, Zach taps Grove of the Burn Willows, gaining Ryan a life to return Punishing Fire to his hand. Then Zach exiles his graveyard. Ryan casts Karn the Great Creator. Zach sighs and Karn resolves. Ryan activates Karn's first ability. Ryan passes. Zach draws and taps Grove of the Burn Willows, gaining Ryan a life, and casts Valakut Exploration. He plays a Bojuka Bog for turn. It enters and exiles Ryan's graveyard. Valakut Exploration triggers and Zach exiles Horizon Canopy. Zach passes, Valakut triggers, and Zach puts Horizon Canopy into his graveyard, dealing 1 to Ryan. The turn moves to Ryan. Ryan draws and activates Karn's second ability, putting Mycosynth Lattice from his sideboard into his hand. He floats mana through City of Traders and plays an Ancient Tomb for turn. His City of Traders triggers and Ryan sacrifices it. He taps his Ancient Tomb and casts Mycosynth Lattice. It resolves, completely locking down Zach. Ryan passes. Zach draws and plays Field of the Dead. Valakut Exploration triggers and Zach exiles another Valakut Exploration. Zach passes, Valakut goes to the graveyard, dealing 1 to Ryan. Ryan draws and activates Karn's first ability, targeting Zach's Field of the Dead. Since it's now an artifact through Mycosynth, it dies. He casts Goblin Crater Maker. He taps his Ancient Tomb and sacrifices Goblin Crater Maker, targeting Elvish Reclaimer. Zach sees the writing on the wall and concedes the game to Ryan. Before Game 2, Ryan moves to sideboard. He takes out a Pyroblast and a Red Elemental Blast. He puts in 2 Surgical Extraction to better deal with Punishing Fire and Life from the Loam. Zach also moves to sideboard. He takes out Karakas, the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, 2 Maze of Ith, Dark Depths, and 2 Elvish Reclaimers. He puts in 3 Force of Vigor to deal with Ryan's artifacts. He puts in 2 Tireless Trackers to better grind in the late game. He also puts in 2 Pyroblasts because Zach knows that Imperial Painter frequently paints blue with Painter's Servant and can give him an additional edge. In Game 2, Zach's opening hand contains an Exploration, Life from the Loam, Blast Zone, Grove of the Burn Willows, Wasteland, and his London Mulligans are a Bojuka Bog and a Dark Depths. In Game 2, Ryan's opening hand contains a Magus of the Moon, Smuggler's Copter, Imperial Recruiter, Ensnaring Bridge, Surgical Extraction, and 2 Mountains. And Zach gets to start us off. Zach plays a Grove of the Burn Willows. He taps it, gaining Ryan a life, and casts Exploration. He plays a Blast Zone as his Exploration land for turn. It enters and gets a counter. Zach passes. Ryan draws and plays a Mountain. He passes. Zach draws and plays a Wasteland. He taps Grove, gaining Ryan a life, and casts Valakut Exploration. Zach ends his turn. Ryan draws and plays a Mountain. He casts Smuggler's Copter. Ryan passes. Zach draws and floats mana from his Blast Zone. He sacrifices Wasteland, destroying his own Blast Zone. He taps Grove, gaining Ryan 1 life to cast Life from the Loam, returning Blast Zone and Wasteland to his hand. He plays Wasteland. Valakut triggers and Zach exiles Rishadan Port. He plays Rishadan Port from exile as his Exploration land for turn. Valakut triggers and Zach exiles Punishing Fire. He casts Mox Diamond, discarding Blast Zone. He moves to his end step, Valakut triggers, and Zach puts Punishing Fire into his graveyard, dealing 1 to Ryan. Still in the end step, Ryan pays 2 life to cast Surgical Extraction, targeting Life from the Loam in Zach's graveyard. He exiles it and searches Zach's hand and library for 3 more and exiles them as well. Zach gives the turn to Ryan. During Ryan's upkeep, Zach activates Rishadan Port, tapping down Ryan's mountain. Ryan draws and passes. Zach draws and passes back. During Ryan's upkeep, Zach ports 1 of his mountains. Ryan draws and plays a Great Furnace. He casts Smuggler's Copter. Ryan passes. At the end of Ryan's turn, Zach sacrifices Wasteland, destroying Ryan's Great Furnace. Zach draws and casts Exploration. Zach passes. During Ryan's upkeep, Zach taps Grove, gaining Ryan a life to port 1 of his mountains. Ryan draws and casts Lotus Petal. Ryan passes back. Zach draws and plays a Grove of the Burn Willows. Valakut triggers and Zach exiles Mox Diamond. Zach passes, Valakut triggers, and he puts Mox Diamond into his graveyard, and Ryan takes 1. During Ryan's upkeep, Zach ports 1 of his mountains. He draws and plays a Mountain. He casts Magus of the Moon. In response, Zach taps Grove, gaining Ryan a life, triggering Punishing Fire in his graveyard. He pays to return it to his hand. Then Magus resolves and Ryan moves to combat. He crews Smuggler's Copter with Magus of the Moon and attacks with the Copter. It triggers and Ryan draws and discards. Zach takes it and Ryan passes. Zach draws and plays another Grove of the Burnwillows. Valakut triggers and Zach exiles a Wasteland. He plays it as his exploration land for turn. Valakut triggers and Zach exiles Rashadan Port. He plays Port as a second exploration land for turn. Valakut triggers again and Zach reveals an exploration. He casts Punishing Fire, killing Magus of the Moon. He casts his third exploration. Zach ends his turn. During Ryan's upkeep, Zach ports one of his mountains. Ryan draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a mountain onto the battlefield. He casts Imperial Recruiter. It enters and Ryan fetches up a Painter's Servant into his hand. He moves to combat and crews Smuggler's Copter. He attacks with Copter, Copter triggers, and Ryan draws and discards. Zach takes it, and Ryan gives the turn to Zach. At the end of Ryan's turn, Zach taps Grove, gaining Ryan a life to cast Punishing Fire, killing Imperial Recruiter. Zach draws and passes. During Ryan's upkeep, Zach ports two of his mountains. He draws and casts Painter's Servant. It enters and Ryan paints blue as it enters. He moves to combat and crews Smuggler's Copter. He attacks with Copter, it triggers, and Ryan draws and discards. Zach takes it, and Ryan ends his turn. At the end of Ryan's turn, Zach taps Grove, Ryan gains 1, and Zach returns Punishing Fire to his hand. He taps another Grove, Ryan gains another 1, and Zach returns another Punishing Fire to his hand. The turn moves to Zach. Zach draws and plays a Thespian Stage. Valakut triggers, and Zach exiles a Force of Vigor. Zach taps Grove, gaining Ryan a life to help cast Force of Vigor, destroying Ryan's Painter's Servant and Smuggler's Copter. Zach ships the turn back to Ryan. Ryan draws and casts Karn the Great Creator. He activates Karn's first ability, killing Zach's Mox Diamond. Ryan passes. At the end of Ryan's turn, Zach taps both Groves, gaining Ryan 2 life to cast 2 Punishing Fires, both at Karn, dealing a total of 4 damage. The turn moves to Zach. Zach draws and taps Grove, gaining Ryan a life to cast Tireless Tracker. He plays a Sheltered Thicket. Valakut and Tracker triggers. He creates a clue and then exiles Dark Depths from the top of his library. He plays Dark Depths as his exploration land for turn. Valakut and Tracker triggers, he creates another clue and exiles a Thespian Stage. He plays Thespian Stage for turn. Tracker and Valakut trigger, he exiles Misty Rainforest and creates another clue. Zach taps Grove, gaining Ryan a life, triggering Punishing Fire, returning it to his hand. He taps Grove, gaining Ryan a life to cast Punishing Fire, killing Karn. Zach moves to his end step, Valakut triggers, and he puts Misty Rainforest into his graveyard and deals 1 to Ryan. During Ryan's upkeep, Zach ports one of his mountains. Ryan draws and casts Ensnaring Bridge. Ryan ends his turn. Zach draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. Valakut and Tracker trigger, he creates a clue and exiles Bojuka Bog. He plays Bojuka Bog as his exploration land for turn. Valakut, Tracker, and Bojuka all trigger. Ryan exiles his graveyard, Zach creates a clue, and then exiles a Tireless Tracker through Valakut. He taps 2 Groves, gaining Ryan 2, to cast Tireless Tracker. He moves to combat and attacks Ryan with his Tracker. Ryan takes it, and Zach passes. During Ryan's upkeep, Zach ports 2 of his mountains. Ryan draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He taps his Ancient Tomb to cast Imperial Recruiter. It enters, and Ryan fetches up a Painter's Servant into his hand. Ryan passes. At the end of Ryan's turn, Zach taps his Ancient Tomb to activate Thespian Stage, making a copy of Dark Depths. Depths triggers, and Zach sacrifices it and creates a 2020 Merit Lodge. Zach draws and cracks a clue. Both trackers trigger and get +1/+1 counters. Then Zach draws a card. He taps Ancient Tomb and Grove, taking 2 damage and gaining Ryan 1 to cast Valakut Exploration. He plays a Forest for turn. Both Valakuts and both trackers trigger. Zach creates 2 clues and then exiles a Horizon Canopy and exiles a Taiga. He plays a Taiga for turn. Valakuts and trackers trigger, he creates 2 more clues and exiles Dark Depths and Wasteland. He plays a Wasteland, creates 2 clues, and exiles Crop Rotation and Sylvan Library. He casts Crop Rotation, sacrificing Bojuka Bog and fetching up a Windswept Heath onto the battlefield. Valakuts and trackers trigger. He creates 2 clues, and with the Valakut triggers on the stack, Zach sacks his Windswept Heath, pays a life, and fetches up a Taiga onto the battlefield. Valakut and trackers trigger, Zach creates 2 clues and then exiles Thespian Stage, exiles another Thespian Stage, and then misses his other 2 Valakut triggers. He moves to combat and attacks Ryan with both Tireless Trackers. Ryan blocks 1 with Recruiter. In response, Zach cracks a clue, puts counters on his trackers, and draws a card. He cracks another clue, giving his trackers a counter and drawing again. Then Ryan takes it, and Zach moves to his end step. Valakut triggers, Zach puts the exiled cards into his graveyard, and then Ryan takes 5. During Ryan's upkeep, Zach ports one of his mountains and then sacrifices Wasteland, destroying Ryan's Ancient Tomb. Ryan draws and plays an Arid Mesa. He passes. At the end of Ryan's turn, Zach taps both Groves, gaining Ryan 2 to crack a clue. He draws a card and puts a counter on his trackers. Zach draws and casts another Valakut Exploration. He casts Crop Rotation, sacrificing Ancient Tomb, and fetches up a Ghost Quarter onto the battlefield. Valakut's and Tracker's trigger, Zach creates 2 clues and exiles a Rishadan Port and 2 Force of Vigors. He taps 2 Groves, gaining Ryan 2 life, and casts Force of Vigor, destroying Ryan's Ensnaring Bridge and Smuggler's Copter. He moves to combat and attacks Ryan with everything, including Merit Lodge, and Zach wins the game. Neither have any sideboard changes before moving to Game 3. In this game, Ryan's opening hand contains an Imperial Recruiter, Painter's Servant, Ancient Tomb, Magus of the Moon, Goblin Welder, Scalding Tarn, and a Phyrexian Revoker. In this game, Zach's super greedy, he told me to say that, opening hand contains a Wasteland, Exploration, Valakut Exploration, 2 Mox Diamonds, and 2 life from the Loams. And Ryan gets to start us off. Ryan plays an Ancient Tomb. He taps his Ancient Tomb to cast Phyrexian Revoker. It enters, and Ryan names Mox Diamond. Zach sighs, looks at his hand, and then Ryan passes the turn. Zach draws and plays a Wasteland. He cracks it, destroying Ryan's Ancient Tomb. Zach passes. Ryan draws and moves to combat. He attacks Zach with his Revoker. Zach takes it, and in his second main phase, Ryan plays a Scalding Tarn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a mountain onto the battlefield. He casts Goblin Welder. Ryan passes. Zach draws and plays a Rishadan Port. He passes. Ryan draws and moves to combat. He attacks Zach with everything. Zach takes it, and in his second main phase, Ryan casts Grindstone. He gives the turn to Zach. Zach draws and plays a Wasteland. He ends his turn. During Ryan's upkeep, Zach ports one of his mountains. Ryan draws and moves to combat. He attacks with everything. Zach takes it, and in his second main phase, Ryan plays a City of Traders. He casts Painter's Servant. It enters, and Ryan names Blue. Zach sweats, and Ryan passes the turn. Zach draws and concedes the game to Ryan. Ladies and gentlemen, what a match. Congrats to Ryan on his win. In Game 1, he fought hard through the attrition of Zach's deck to finally get to a win. In Game 2, Zach continually applied pressure and eventually pushed through Ryan's walls he had put up to stop him. Removing Zach's life from the Loams really turned the game into a grind. In Game 3, Zach kept a greedy hand and got very punished when Ryan landed his Phyrexian Revoker. He had no colored sources, and Ryan had the combo ready to go. The most valuable card from tonight's match goes to Valakut Exploration. This card kept giving Zach more and more card advantage. He was eventually able to start doing real damage to Ryan while digging for the cards he needed. After losing his Loams, Zach used Valakut to eventually dig for his win. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will win the next Legacy match. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.